Welcome back. You're watching Credlin. Well, 43 Victorians are now infected with COVID-19, all because they broke the government's rules. Last week, Victoria's DHHS, which is the Department of Health and Human Services, revealed members of 5 households in a number of suburbs, Hallam, Clyde, Narre Warren South and Cranbourne North, all travelled outside the mandated 5 kilometres radius, leading to an outbreak which they're calling the Kasich cluster. But they won't be fined. They won't be fined. There you go. They will not be fined. Let's bring in my panel, Sky News Outsiders co-host and Herald Sun columnist Rita Panahi and Melbourne City Councillor Nick Rees. Now, how is it there's one rule for some, Rita, and another rule for others? And I didn't know that it was either you cooperate with contact tracing and you don't get the fine, or you get the fine. I know it was an either-or proposition.
Well, it's Victoria. It's the state of double standards. We saw the same thing with the BLM march. There were no fines there, and before the march took place, they declared no one would be fined, guaranteeing a fairly bumper turnout of 10,000. And it seems that the police admit now that the threat of violence and people damaging property is what prevented them from going in and arresting anybody. And again, with this example, it's the threat of non-cooperation that is preventing them from fining, because they obviously want to get that information. It's crucial data to be able to accurately contact trace where those people have been, who they've been in contact with. So it seems in this state, if you behave poorly, then you get preferential treatment. If you behave in a much better manner, you cop the fines. I think police should be far more discriminating with those fines as far as using their good judgment and not imposing them if it's an honest mistake, if people haven't meant to break a restriction. I think those fines are crippling for so many people, Peter, and they've been handing them out willy-nilly. But in this particular instance, again, this is why that double standard sticks out. This is the state that's fined people more than any other by a factor of 10. And now they've decided they're not going to fine people who actually are spreading the infection.
Well, and Rita's right there, Nick Rees, but I'd also add, you know, you can be a mum, pregnant mum, in your pyjamas, you put something on Facebook. She's now facing a legal action. She's been obviously charged, will face court. That will cost her a pretty penny. But 43 people, because they all belong to a particular ethnic group who, we're not allowed to say on air. That was a debate and an apology from Brett Sutton recently, of course, in press conferences. But somehow, because they refused to cooperate unless there was no fine, get away with it.
Look, Peter and Rita, I agree with you on the face of it. It doesn't look good, but it is one of those things that when you dig into it a little bit more deeply, it is more complicated than it appears at first glance. I think what's happened here is that law enforcement authorities have made the judgment call that they want any person in this community who has left their home and potentially expose others to the virus, that they want them to come forward, and they think a greater public good can be achieved by encouraging people to come forward than to not. It was a similar thing today where there was a brutal murder last night in Paran, and it happened after the curfew hour. And the police are saying quite clearly today, look, if you're a witness to this, we don't care if you're out after the curfew. We need people to come forward because this is a murder case that we're trying to solve. And so the police are exercising a little bit of discretion in these cases to try and get to what they think
But the police aren't doing the contact tracing, Nick. Don't conflate the two. The police aren't doing the contact tracing. The police aren't the ones out there investigating who's seen who's been in contact with who. That's something DHHS has been doing. So the decision not to fine, to just fob that off to the police, I think that's coming from another department. And I would love the police to show a bit more judgment and not impose these fines in the manner they have been, but that's not what they've been doing.
There's a legal difference. There's a very clear legal difference between someone witnessing a murder, so watching the commission of a crime, and someone breaking all the rules and laws here by the state of emergency, visiting other homes and being, committing the crime by virtue of what it is now in the police state of Victoria. So there is a difference. Watching the crime, committing the crime, there should be one rule for all. I want to go to climate targets. Scott Morrison says that net zero emissions by 2050 is achievable, but he's not going to commit to a hard and fast target now, unlike Labor, who don't have a plan for tomorrow or even this next decade, but they're happy to go right out on the never, never. Let's have a listen.
I'm interested in doing the things that make that happen. And I think those sort of things are achievable with the right investments in the right technology. And you won't get there, I'll guarantee you this, if you're going to narrow the sorts of technologies and the sorts of solutions that you're prepared to look at.
Well, let's talk about that.
Why we want to broaden that out.
Rita?
Well, he's right. This is one of the reasons why Albo's floundering in the polls, because he's fixated on these issues that do very well on Twitter, but Twitter is not representative of the wider Australian public, whose primary concerns when it comes to energy is price and then reliability. And environmental concerns are a long way down the list below that. So if you can't get that right, if you can't explain what your policies are going to cost, then there's no point putting out these fanciful targets 30 years down the track. Tell us how you're going to pay for it, how you're going to do it, and then we can have an intelligent conversation.
Nick, put your hat on as a former Labor strategist. You've got to look at those news poll numbers today for Labor, and particularly the sort of cellar dweller numbers we're seeing for Anthony Albanese. And Dennis Shanahan said tonight they're baked in for the leader, and they're almost baked in for the Labor brand unless they start putting some policies out there that people will come with them on. Clearly, this is somewhere Labor needs to do better.
Well, I thought that was a train wreck interview for the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, actually. And I thought some of the things he said in that interview were just blatantly ridiculous. I mean, why Australia can't commit to a 50% reduction in emissions by 2050 when most other advanced nations that we like to compare ourselves are doing the same is beyond me. If you can't have a plan if you don't know where you're going. That's why countries like Germany, led by Conservative Chancellor Angela Merkel, have committed to 50% by 2050, or Britain, led by Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson, have committed to 50% by 2050. Now, sure, Saudi Arabia hasn't committed to that. Donald Trump in America hasn't committed to that. But most advanced countries have committed to that, and Australia should do the same.
Oh, that's a great reason to do it, because other countries have done it. Give us a break, Nicholas. And let's not forget, many of the countries that have done it have got access to nuclear, which your lot refuse to even discuss. So don't talk about 2050 without nuclear.
If you've got a target, then you can plan around it. You give business the certainty they need to make the investments, and if it's nuclear, so be it. But you need to give certainty to make those investments. Not say 50%
Nick's
by
running
some
to be the
point
Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne. Nick, maybe we might see some windmills in Melbourne. We might see super solar in Melbourne. We might even see nuclear in Melbourne. Not that there's going to be business. We might as well have a nuclear power plant in the centre of Melbourne. Got to leave it there. Rita Panahi, Nick Rees, thank you for your time. All right, coming up.